Yeah, this case is so big, it's being called the largest ever prosecuted by the Minnesota Attorney General.
America, we've got a story that perfectly captures everything wrong with Tim Walz's leadership in Minnesota. While he's been busy campaigning for his third term as governor, his state agencies have been hemorrhaging taxpayer money through massive Medicaid fraud schemes. We're talking about an $11 million scam involving fake patients, ghost visits, and personal care assistants who never provided care. But here's the kicker, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The Department of Human Services just suspended payments to 28 more providers for billing fraud, and Tim Walz's response has been to fire people and issue executive orders instead of actually fixing the systematic corruption.
Prosecutors describe as the principal actor in a nearly $11 million Medicaid fraud scheme is due before a judge.
What is up, guys? Tyson here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. This story shows exactly what happens when you elect progressive politicians who care more about virtue signaling than protecting taxpayer dollars. Let me break down the Abid Rasheed Said case for you, because this isn't just another billing error. This is systematic theft from programs designed to help Minnesota's most vulnerable citizens.
Now, Abid Rasheed Said is charged with 10 counts, including perjury, racketeering, and aiding and abetting a theft by swindle. Said and two others are accused of operating personal care assistant businesses where they allegedly overbilled clients to secure Medicaid reimbursement funds.
Abid Rasheed, this so-called principal actor in this scheme, was running multiple personal care assistance businesses that were supposed to help disabled and elderly Minnesotans live independently. Instead, he was billing Medicaid for services that never happened while pocketing millions in taxpayer money. But here's what makes this even more outrageous. Said was already convicted of theft by swindle in 2021. A judge specifically ordered him not to work with any companies that accepted Medicaid reimbursements. Yet somehow he was back in the business in 2023, stealing even more money.
At that time, a judge ordered that he not have any work with companies that accept Medicaid reimbursements. Again, that was back in 2021. These most recent charges stem from 2023.
Think about this. Minnesota's oversight system is so broken that a convicted fraudster was able to set up new companies and steal another $11 million from Medicaid. Where was the Department of Human Services? Where was the safeguards? Where was Tim Walz's leadership? This case involves 10 felony counts, including perjury, racketeering, and theft by swindle. We're not talking about just paperwork mistakes. We're talking about organized criminal enterprise treating Medicaid like a personal ATM machine. The Abid Rasheed Said case isn't an isolated incident. This is part of a massive pattern of fraud that's been bleeding Minnesota taxpayers dry while Tim Walz has been asleep at the wheel.
Another group of Minnesota Medicaid providers is under fire for fraud tonight, this time tied to services meant to help adults with disabilities. We're learning state officials have suspended payments to 28 providers.
28 providers suspended for fraud in the disability services program alone. These are services for adults with disabilities who need help living independently, some of the most vulnerable people in Minnesota, and criminals have been exploiting their needs to steal taxpayer money.
ICS is a Medicaid service that allows adults with disabilities to live independently in community through provider-controlled settings. Since the beginning of this month, DHS suspended payments to 28 providers for billing for services that were not provided.
The Integrated Community Supports Program is supposed to help disabled adults live with dignity and independence. Instead, it's become a cash cow for fraudsters who bill for services they never provided, while vulnerable people go without the care that they actually need. This is the third major fraud scheme this month. First was the Feeding Our Future scandal, where $250 million was stolen from child nutrition programs. Then an $8 million housing fraud scheme, now a $14 million autism service fraud case. And that's just what we know. Minnesota has become the fraud capital of America under Tim Walz's watch, and his response has been absolutely pathetic. Now let's talk about Tim Walz's absolutely inadequate response to this crisis, because it perfectly shows how he's unfit to lead Minnesota, let alone be anywhere near national politics.
As Governor Walz begins his campaign for a third term, his handling of fraud in our state.
Walz is running for his third term while his state agencies are being looted by fraudsters. His handling of this crisis is going to be front and center of his campaign, and it should be because it shows complete leadership failure.
The millions of dollars in fraud uncovered within Minnesota state agencies is something Governor Walz is likely to face intense scrutiny for in his campaign for his third term as governor.
State Representative Kristen Robbins, who chairs the House Fraud Committee, has been trying to hold Walz accountable for this mess. She's been warning about these problems for months, while Walz has been more focused on his political ambitions than protecting taxpayer money.
I think he has failed to hold his agencies accountable.
Kristen Robbins is one of Walz's Republican opponents in the race for governor. She also is the chair of the House Fraud Committee, which held a Capitol hearing Wednesday to grill state officials about why they were slow to act when warned repeatedly about fraud.
Failed to hold his agencies accountable. That is exactly right. Walz has been warned repeatedly about fraud in his agencies, but he's too busy playing politics to actually fix the problem. Now Minnesota taxpayers are paying the price.
This comes after DHS terminated the assistant commissioner in charge of the Housing Stabilization Services Program, Eric Rumdel, hours before Wednesday's Capitol hearing.
So Walz's response to getting caught is to fire people right before legislative hearings. That's not leadership. That's damage control. He's trying to throw subordinates under the bus instead of taking responsibility for the systematic failure of his administration. Now let's talk about the Department of Human Services Inspector General James Clark, because his testimony of the House Fraud Committee shows exactly how broken Minnesota's oversight system really is.
I will do everything in my power to detect and prevent fraud. Payments will be shut off immediately at the first signs of fraud.
That's Department of Human Services Inspector General James Clark in front of the House Fraud Committee last week, promising to weed out bad actors.
I will do everything in my power to detect and prevent fraud. Really? Because Said was already convicted for Medicare fraud in 2021, yet he was able to set up new companies and steal $11 million more. Where was the fraud detection system?
An executive order from Governor Tim Walz gave DHS additional authority, and today they used it.
Walz had to issue an executive order to give DHS the authority to stop payments to fraud providers. What were they doing before? Just letting people steal money with no consequences? This shows how broken the system was under Walz's leadership. The Inspector General is making promises now, but where was this aggressive enforcement when Said was setting up his fraudulent businesses? Where was the data mining and tip investigation when $250 million was being stolen from the Feeding Our Future program?
State officials say we are taking more aggressive actions to stop payments, including relying on tips and data mining that demonstrate a credible allegation of fraud.
More aggressive action, meaning they weren't being aggressive before. They were just letting fraudsters loot Medicaid programs while vulnerable Minnesotans went without services. This is what happens when you elect progressive politicians who care more about expanding programs than protecting them from fraud. Here's what really gets me about this whole situation. While criminals like Said were stealing millions from Medicaid, real disabled and elderly Minnesotans were going without the care that they desperately needed. Every dollar stolen from these programs is a dollar that doesn't go to helping somebody with disabilities or live independently. Every fake billing entry means less money available for legitimate providers who actually care for vulnerable people. These waiver service programs are essential for helping disabled Minnesotans live with dignity. But when fraudsters are allowed to loot the system, it undermines the entire program and hurts the people who actually need help the most. And what's Walz's solution? Suspend payments while investigations are pending. That means legitimate providers who actually care for disabled people might not get paid while the state sorts out which providers are criminals and which ones are honest. This is the progressive governance model in action. Create massive government programs with no oversight, then act surprised when criminals exploit them. Meanwhile, the people who actually need help suffer the consequences. America, this Medicaid fraud case in Minnesota is a perfect example of Tim Walz's failed leadership. He's been governing for years while criminals have been systematically looting programs designed to help the most vulnerable Minnesotans. Said's $11 million fraud scheme should have never happened. He was already convicted for Medicaid fraud in 2021, yet Minnesota's broken oversight system allowed him to set up new companies and steal millions more.
Democratic political analyst Jeff Hayden believes Walz is determined to fix the fraud issue, in part so it's not what he is remembered for as governor.
Walz doesn't want to be remembered for the fraud crisis. It's too late, man. This is your legacy. Hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from programs meant to help children, disabled adults, and vulnerable families while he was busy playing politics.
I think the governor really is mission driven and wants to fight and to try to do as much as he can to protect Minnesotans. And I don't think he wants his legacy to be this issue of fraud.
Mission driven to protect Minnesotians. He's failed to protect Minnesota taxpayers from massive fraud schemes. He's failed to protect vulnerable disabled people from criminals who steal their services. He's failed to protect the integrity of essential government programs. The people of Minnesota deserve a governor who actually oversees state agencies instead of just expanding them. They deserve leadership that puts protecting taxpayer money ahead of political ambitions. Tim Walz has proven he can't manage his own state agencies. How can anybody trust him with the higher office? Minnesota needs new leadership who will actually fight for fraud instead of just issuing executive orders after getting caught red-handed. Let me know what you guys think about this. Drop it down in the comment section down below. Smash the like button if you kindly would. Share, subscribe, and as always, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.